Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. BJ Kraemer, the president of Jersey Wahoos Swim Club. BJ, how are you this morning?
To quote Paul, never better.
Yeah, he says that every time. Our head coach Paul Donovan and I always joke with him. It must be an amazingly charmed life he leads. That every day is the best day of his life. He says
Right.
never better. It's like I'm just jealous, really. If
I
anything.
respond with, if I was any better, I'd be him.
That's right. So I wanted to bring you on in my ongoing effort here. I'm doing like a Wahoos block. I've had Paul on. I've had you on. Eventually, we're going to get to this part where you become president of the board here at Wahoos, but there's sort of a lot more to this story, and I want to lay a little bit of the groundwork. So for people listening, talk about, like, let's go all the way back to you getting involved in the sport of swimming as a kid. Talk a little bit about how that came to be, what your experience was like growing up.
All right. So I won't go back to swim lessons. I'll go back to competitive swimming.
Yeah, start with the competitive stuff. That's fine.
So I lived in South Jersey, grew up, and like many kids from the area, got involved through the Tri-County Swim Club Association. So I swam. I grew up in Cinnaminson, swam for Pomona Swim Club. Had the pleasure of swimming under then Bob Christella, who was also a swim coach from Wahoos that unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But that was my intro to swimming. Swam competitively all through high school. Came to Wahoos actually back and forth. I swam for I think it was Jersey Storm was the name of the club for a little bit, out of Fort Dix. Military family, so we had a connection in there. But swam in the Junior B1, which is probably Horizon 3, I think, if I did a direct nesting. Went there, came back, swam Junior A1 under Karen and Bruce, which is now our Horizon 1, still under Bruce. And then I actually didn't take the normal path through the national squad. I went to what's your high school squad?
The group I coach now. Yeah.
Yep. So I swam for 2 years under that group. I was a 3-sport athlete in high school, went to Cinnaminson, and then my junior year made the commitment to go into what was then senior A1 or the national team. And then swam throughout college. I tell everybody swimming is what got me over the hump to get into West Point. I think it was a huge differentiator. And I guess that's the end of my swimming career. And then I don't know if you want to come back to.
Well, what were your other sports? I'm curious. I haven't heard this part before. Like you said, you're a 3-sport athlete in high school. What were your other sports?
Football and track.
Wow. That's quite a diversity.
Well, I played soccer growing up. If you met my father, he's 6'2". He was a linebacker played linebacker for Westchester. And I kept saying, I'm going to get my growth spurt. I'm going to get my growth spurt. Anybody who's met me knows that I never got my growth spurt.
Still time, BJ. You don't know.
Yeah. I'm holding out hope.
That's right. What position did you play football
wise? Defensive back.
Okay.
Primarily.
Yeah. And then what did you like? What were your events in track?
800 and 2 mile, 2 mile. I wasn't a stud track runner.
Okay.
It was really something to just keep me in shape in the spring season.
And what changed for you there? Like you said, when you were a junior in high school, you decided like, oh, I'm going all in on swimming. What was behind that decision?
So I think probably a lot like a lot of people's story in the South Jersey area. Tri-County was just, there's so much camaraderie there. Mm-hmm. And every summer I'd get in really good shape, and, Tri-County is small potatoes, but in many regards, but I would always do really well. And I say, you know what, this is probably my best chance. And if I double down on the sport and really go all in, maybe I'll be able to carve something out for myself.
Yeah. I mean, this is so sorry. Also, just to give context to people who are not from South Jersey, Tri-County, this is like summer league
swim season.
Swimming. Yeah. And I think that is a pretty common story. I think, one of the sad things of COVID times was that a lot of summer leagues were canceled, and summer leagues really, I think, are the lifeblood of swimming. It's just like where most people get involved and have a really fun time and think like, oh, maybe I'll do some more of this, like this is pretty fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's an intro to the sport. It's competitive in its nature. I mean, 36 teams in Tri-County. And as they say, the broader the base that are coming into the sport, the higher the peak. Yep. So I think across the country, summer swim leagues, even swim lesson programs are the intro to the sport.
And as I'm learning my New Jersey geography, the three counties that make up Tri-County, is it Camden, Burlington,
and Gloucester.
Gloucester. I knew it. Somebody's listening to this like, why do we care which county is in New Jersey? We have a lot of, for people listening, we have a lot of towns in New Jersey. This is somebody who didn't grow up here. The number of towns drives me crazy. Like I just found out last night that you could live in Marlton, and be like 5 minutes from our pool. And I didn't even really know that Marlton was a place that existed, but it's very close. So, so you commit to swimming there in your junior year. Was there, like, when you think back to especially that period, junior, senior, when you were up on the top team of Wahoos, are there some memories that stick out from that time, like stuff that sort of really carried forward for you?
I wasn't prepared for that question. You were supposed to prep me for this. So I would say that we had a really tight group of swimmers. So unlike most kids that tend to be friends with the kids in their high school, swimming ends up becoming your competitive outlet, but also your social outlet. So we had a tight-knit crew of guys and girls. I think we had as much fun outside the pool as we did inside the pool. But I think we had a very competitive group or hardworking group of athletes. And that story probably goes, across the country. People can identify with that. But the one I think worthy of saying is we had such Wahoos pride at the time that the local sports papers, we made an agreement that if anybody got interviewed for a paper, that we would reference Jersey Wahoos in our interview, just to kind of fly the flag and try to reference the guys we're training with.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's always like my perception, again, sort of telling people like one of the reasons I'm here coaching is that I have a friend of mine whose house I sleep in on Monday, Wednesday nights, who grew up swimming on Wahoos. And he was always, he's 41 years old now. And he still has a lot of stories from that time. He's still really proud of coming up on the team. And it seems like it's always been a really sort of, there's always been some kind of culture of hard work, sort of hard-nosed grit here in this club. And I think that's kind of cool.
I think it's worth mentioning, because during that time, 92 Sean Killian's in the Olympics, 96 Peter Wright's in the Olympics. To think about a small club in South Jersey producing athletes in back-to-back Olympics, there was kind of this buzz about the sport. It was like a local Michael Phelps effect,
right?
Inside of the club, and with that came a certain level of excitement and pride and enthusiasm, and certainly work ethic. Both were distance guys, and there was a pride in doing 8,000 IMs and 10,000 meter freestyles, long course, and the pain.
So you already referenced that you eventually went to West Point. At what point was that a goal for you growing up? Like, at what point did you said you were from a military family? So I'm assuming maybe early that sort of came in. But at what point did you decide I really want to go to West Point?
So I'll say that the goal was to go to a military academy, and it was
Okay.
two parts. One, there was my parents did expose us to all the academies, and there was a certain level of pride in service, but then a certain level of pride in getting into a prestigious academic institution. So early on, I wanted to get into an academy, but I'd be lying. It wasn't until my senior year that I devoted to West Point. Actually, growing up, because being from South Jersey, I think we get exposed a whole lot more to Annapolis than we do to West Point. So and the fact that I was a swimmer and being a Navy SEAL was supposed to be, the coolest thing in the world.
Right.
I thought I was going to Naval Academy until my senior year of high school.
And what changed for you? I mean, what pushed you in that direction?
So like we already talked about, swimming was the thing that got me over the hump. And I heard that at the Naval Academy, you'd have to be pretty top in your class to have the opportunity to be a Navy SEAL. The alternative was to land on a boat. And that wasn't for me. So
yeah,
a combination of that and actually a West Point father that went to a Wahoos father that went to West Point kind of opened my eyes up to West Point a little further. And that led me down a rabbit hole of really being all in on West Point, probably like Thanksgiving of my senior year.
Wow. Yeah. So you end up going to West Point. You swam at West Point. What was that experience like?
So it's kind of two-part. Like, there's good news, bad news when you're an athlete at West Point, and in particular a swimmer. The good news is you get out of some of the quote BS. The bad news is you're replacing the BS that's like an hour of stuff
PT,
with 3 or 4 hours of workouts. But I mean, you are instantly a part of the team, and you have upperclassmen that are looking out for you, whether that's academically or just protecting you to some level of, you're getting your own. I'll use the word hazing, but it's not hazing in the sense that it used to be thought of.
Right.
It's really just indoctrination. And instead of getting it from all of the upperclassmen in what's called a company, you're really earning your stripes from the team. But my happiest moments in life, especially going through West Point, and hindsight, you always remember the good stuff. It's all swimming related, whether it's competitive sports, outside of the pool in the off season, or travel trips or whatever that are getting you away from the academy. Swimming was a blessing while you're at West Point.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it strikes me that, there's a certain level of camaraderie that must come from being at a service academy just by itself with the other people that are also there at the service academy. And then you have that subgroup within that, your team and everything that you're doing. You cite some really positive memories. So I'm going to ask you again, like what were some of those really good memories, or what's one that really stands out to you?
So we have what's called the South Dock, and South Dock is just these open sports fields that are used for intramurals. But I think the very best memories we have are off season. I mean, you've got a bunch of, I don't know how many athletes we had on the team, call it 40 guys that are completely type A personality, competitive athletes at the college level. Yeah. And we are not a regular institution, right? We're not getting to go out partying or whatever.
No.
So all of that social outlet became a competitive outlet on the South Dock fields. And I mean, ultimate Frisbee games, football games, like there was, it was the most fun time that we could have had there. And you're outside of the pool.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll say one of my highlight experiences from swimming in college. I swam at Colby College up in Waterville, Maine. And probably like, if I think about it, one of the highlight experiences there was like winning an intramural softball title with other guys from my swim team. Do you know what I mean? And just having that experience, like we were all out of the season, but we're still doing stuff together, and it wasn't necessarily swimming, and it was just nice to be there with some other people and some people that you're familiar with and do something competitive. So I could definitely relate to that. So let me ask you this as well, because I think like I haven't had her on the podcast, but one of the people I sort of talked to off the podcast, she's actually the coach of the women's team at the Air Force Academy. So I've learned a lot about swimming specifically at that academy. How did you balance all the opportunities you get like at a service academy? Because one thing she brings up is like, you're going to have these sort of leadership opportunities. You're going to have these other opportunities, and they place time demands on you that sometimes can conflict with swimming. Did you see a lot of that as sort of conflicting in your time, or was it really sort of possible to balance it all? Were the things you were giving up as part of the West Point experience, you think?
I have so many answers to this question. One, I will self-admit I was there to survive academically and hopefully thrive athletically.
Yeah.
And I survived both of them.
Okay, great.
So I think that there's a certain level of maturity, and whether it's a guy girl thing, male female thing, or it's a BJ Kraemer versus other people thing. My academic experience was, let me get out of here. Like, let me just survive.
Yeah.
I think you can't help but, all of the leadership is osmosis there. There is nobody can take advantage of all of the opportunities. And you may not even know this, but I'm still in the Army Reserves as a lieutenant colonel. And I'm actually an adjunct instructor at West Point in the systems engineering department. So now I go back and I'm like, even the buildings that you just like, your tunnel vision, trying to get from class to class, like hopefully you got your homework done, whatever. It is intentionally an intensive survival experience. And, now having like a ton of leadership experience, and positive psychology is a big thing I read and study from a leadership perspective, and creating an environment like that's a cauldron of stress going on there very intentionally to make you just have to figure out how to prioritize and in many cases survive. Like there's more work than you can do. There's more opportunity than you can take advantage of. And I think despite that, and despite not being able to, embrace it all, everybody gets through it as a much better person, much better leader, a much better student. But I would be lying if I said I was even worried about taking advantage of everything at my fingertips there. It was like,
you were worried about drinking from a fire hose and how you were going to not drown.
Some of the guest speakers that we had, and it's like you're in the back, either trying to like not get caught sleeping to catch up on sleep, or trying to get homework done for the next class. And the speaker didn't matter. I can't even, I know that they were famous, but I can't even tell you all the speakers we had because I wasn't paying attention all the time.
You cite something that's a sort of important crossover between the two of us. You said that positive psychology is something that you've gotten involved in a lot. Obviously, that's something I'm working to sort of infuse here into Jersey Wahoos. When did you first get exposed to it, and how did that happen?
So, I mean, I took psychology classes. It's part of core curriculum at West Point. So, I I I'll go back even further. I read a book in high school. I believe it was called Slaying the Dragon, and
Okay.
it was about Michael Johnson's. Uh, he was the first Olympic athlete to I think gold medal and have the world record in both the 200 and 400. And it was this incredible, we're
Yeah,
going
he
back
ran
to
1932 in the 200.
yeah.
I can remember the world record was like 19.8 and he went 19.3. It was insane.
Yeah. So when we were growing up, that was like the Olympic feat, right?
Yeah.
This was before the Michael Phelps and all that.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book, like everybody that's famous, successful, writes a book, and it was called Slaying the Dragon. And I think that was the first place that I really got like exposed to it. The other person that I read in high school was Pat Croce, who you may or may not know him, but
the Sixers GM, right?
Yeah. So he actually started out as a physical therapist, entrepreneur, but super positive guy. And so I read their books, and that was probably really the seeds of like, there's something to a certain level of like approaching life with positivity and optimism.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm fumbling through this because it's the first time I've been asked that question. Like, when did I get exposed to it? It just kind of all happens. And then, I'll fast forward. I got into a lot of entrepreneurial reading, and there's a lot of crossover between subjects: leadership, positive psychology, and entrepreneurship. Like, it's all about mindset and really coaching. I mean, most of my coaching books are at home, but I mean, I grad assistant at West Point. I volunteer coached at every military installation I got stationed at, including North Baltimore Aquatic Club. When Bob Bowman was there, I volunteered coach for those guys. I was just always around the sport, and I think you can't have coaching, leadership without positive psychology.
Yeah. I guess I should have prefaced too, one of the ways I'm driving at it is a lot of people listening may not know this, but the U.S. Army was sort of a pioneer in the field of positive psychology in terms of implementing programs. They got highly involved with some of the sort of foremost people in the sport, working to basically like improve resilience, because that's
that's
quite
right.
an important thing. And
resilience. So I almost think of resilience as the survival side of positive psychology, or it's the proactive survival side.
Exactly.
Like, how do you avoid stress, or in our case, we had positive psychologists and resilience specialists attached to our battalion in Iraq. There's very much what are the outlets you're creating? How do you keep your mind right? How do you compartmentalize what's going on in a wartime? Because it's a challenging environment.
Yeah. I sometimes I phrase it to people as like mental prehab. The same way physically you might go in and like strengthen stuff up so that you don't bust your shoulder when you're swimming 20 hours a week. The same way, get your brain ready to deal with really adverse circumstances. There's definitely a part to that. So you graduate from West Point and you went into service. You mentioned going to Iraq. How many times or how much time did you spend over there?
So I'll back up because I think it's a little bit important to my connectivity to the sport.
Yeah.
I went to the officer basic course, and then I came back to West Point. One graduating senior from every class is brought back to be almost like a bridge or a mentor to the athletes on the team. So I got to be what we call an athletic intern or a grad assistant.
Yeah, kind of like a fifth-year senior at another
exactly.
school. Yeah.
So that actually offset my class at West Point was just wrong time, you know, from a perspective of like the number of KIA. We've lost the most classmates in the class of 2004 since Vietnam, a West Point class from Vietnam.
Because you graduated in 2004, and
2004,
that's like
right
Iraq, Afghanistan, like, yeah.
And I could go down a number of holes here.
Okay.
So I got to come back as grad assistant. That offset my cycle a little bit. So I ended up only doing one deployment. So it was a full 12 months to Baghdad. And then from there ended up, and we could talk, we don't need to share war stories. I'm happy to answer questions.
I don't have any war stories. So you're the only one with war stories on this podcast.
I will, just because I'm getting ready to send this book to somebody, actually Matt Crispino's brother. Okay. So The Strong Gray Line is a book that my class wrote. It's wartime reflections from the West Point class of 2004. So I'm gonna bring this back.
Okay.
Me and another swimmer, Charlie Lewis, co-authored the chapter. Our first classmate killed in Iraq was also our best friend and the Army swim team's team captain, Dennis Olinsky.
Wow.
So we endured that, and he died November 19th, 2005. I deployed December 3rd, 2005. So talk about resilience. I eulogized him on, I'll call it a Thursday, and I was deploying the following Tuesday.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't know what made me go off on that track, but
no, I mean,
I think it's worth mentioning. And
that's certainly, I mean, like, you know, it makes me think about my own, like, again, I'm thinking back to my softball title, you know, like all my softball teammates are alive and well. And that's just definitely a something that's very different. And also, as you point out, very specific to the time and place you were moving on from there, that we were really at that point actively engaged in a couple wars. So you serve, you deployed for 12 months, you come back. As you said, as I can imagine, the military life is a little bit itinerant. You're going from one base to another, and you said you stay involved in swimming from that time. At that point, did you foresee yourself having a career in the military? Were you planning for something else? You'd survived, right? You'd both literally and figuratively. What were you thinking about doing next?
So I don't know when I made the hard line to get off active duty. It was probably this evolving question that was always going on. Like, all right, everybody owes 5 years when you graduate from West Point. So, you know, that's like the first milestone when you have, you know, a decision. Yeah. Up until that point, it's like, hey, my Army career was a little different than my West Point experience. Like in the Army, it was not survive. It was go all in on whatever role the Army gives you. You don't have a choice except to like do your very best. So that mindset just kind of stuck with me through when I was in grad school. I got the opportunity to do a utilization assignment with the Army Corps of Engineers, which was kind of it was a shift from the operational deploying side of the Army to more of a stateside. It was really it's almost a civilian agency that's commanded by Army officers.
Yeah.
So that experience opened up kind of a whole new world. I moved to Baltimore. My now wife at the time was my girlfriend. She was in grad school at Loyola. I was like finally getting some normalization, no threat of deployment, a 9-to-5 job. I was doing the 9-to-5 Army Corps job, and that's when I started volunteering at North Baltimore because I felt like I should be giving back in some way. Yeah. So I just started volunteering up there, and So that was, what time frame is this? This is probably 08, 09.
So, as you said, you sort of start to look for a life. We're gonna fast forward a little bit because I think people are listening to this like probably are like, hey Chris, how about you get to
We
the
haven't
part
talked about swimming.
Yeah, we haven't talked about swimming yet. Like, talk about swimming. So, I kind of like the thesis of all of this too is part of what I'm trying to figure out and talk about is. I think you're a little bit unique in terms of somebody who's president of a swim club. And one of the reasons is, your sort of archetype model for president of the swim club is, somebody's, your parent of the kid who swims on the national squad of the team. And, you maybe like sort of get pressed into like, hey, we need somebody in here, and you do it for 2 or 3 years and move on. But you're actually like, you're at a similar stage of life to me. My oldest kid is 7 years old. I think your oldest is 6 years old. So
Yep.
not on the national squad yet.
Yeah.
How do you make this decision that you want to get involved in Wahoos, that you'd like to serve sort of in this volunteer board position?
Say that again. Volunteer board position.
Volunteer board position.
I think that's important. So I stayed involved in the sport, and it like I started out, the sport of swimming gave a lot to me. And I think outside of my parents, the coaches I had from the sport made the most impact on who I am and who I became, and the opportunities that were created for me out of, partially because of the athlete I was, but I think more because of the intangibles that came from those coaches and the sport. So long story short, I always had the passion for coaching, and I came back, volunteer coached with Wahoos, and then that evolved into trying to formalize some kind of like schedule. And I got out of the Army, I moved back to the area, trying to balance a infantile business career with coaching, because I just loved the sport.
Yeah.
And eventually we had our first child. And at that point I said to the head coach at the time, John, I can't coach anymore, but if there's ever an opportunity for me to help on the board, happy to be a part of it. And I think all of that stems from, one, recognition that the sport gave a lot to me, but two, I think it was a college coach. It's a shame I don't remember exactly who said this or where I heard it, but I heard the line, "The sport of swimming has given a lot to you. Find a way to give back to the sport." And in particular, Jersey Wahoos gave a lot to me. Mm-hmm. So find a way to give back to Jersey Wahoos. Now, here I am. I think it's 6 years now on the board. That I didn't intend to be on the board for 6 years. The history of how I got here and the transition and all of that, I think it's worth mentioning, because I came on as just, a general board member. The board was probably the same group of former swim parents, and they just progressed and stayed involved. And Bert German, who had been almost a founding member, I guess you could call it, of the rebranding of Jersey Wahoos, was, I think, in some way, shape, or form, either the vice president or president from 1973 till about 2015.
Wow.
So I saw a need for some new perspective and energy, and we had a group of some newer board members, and I kind of take pride in the fact, although I don't want to be the only one, that I am a former athlete of the program. I'm a product of this organization. And while some of the coaches change, some of them don't. Bruce,
Right.
I swam for Bruce. So there's a lot inside of this program that I think needs care and feeding, and there needs to be stewardship of it, of this organization going into the future. So, I mean, that's what I look at. It's like, this is an organization that meant a whole lot to me and to the path my life took me. Find a way to give back.
Yeah.
And I'd challenge that. I don't know who all listens to this.
Inside mostly swim coaches. Mostly
inside
swim coaches.
Wahoos, outside. Well, and I think it's to the benefit of swim coaches that there's an equal part alumni with parents.
Yeah.
Involved in what the board's role is, which is fiduciary responsibility, accountability, and strategic direction of the organization. Yeah. Right. I mean, like, that's important, that it's not just the national squad parent or a smattering of parents. It's important that there are people that are product of the organization. Who's a better spokesman for Jersey Wahoos than somebody who looks back and says, I look back on my life, and outside of genetics and parents, Jersey Wahoos is one of the things that, made all the difference.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right about that. One of the things of, like, again, I reference a lot my coaching experience in Denmark, and every single organization basically in Denmark has a board, has a volunteer board working for it. So definitely all the sports clubs, and we had very much a sort of typical model in the swim club that I worked in, with parents of kids that were on the team, and sometimes I was frustrated with that model. I think a lot of swim coaches get frustrated with that model, but actually as I said, he was called the foreman, the sort of top guy on our board. Had grown up in the rowing system, and people who, again, for context, like, Denmark is unusually successful in rowing for a tiny little country. They're really, really good. There's a lot of things about the rowing clubs that I think functions really well. And one of the things he said was, like, hey, I grew up in the top rowing club, and 50% of our board was former athletes from the club who stayed involved with the club, who, they've got something else going on in their lives, or even they would have coaches who would retire, and then come on to the board to sort of continue, as you said, like, giving advice and giving strategic knowledge. And so there's definitely something to be said for that. And I think, you referenced too, like, having new blood, right? It's you do want to have some degree of change in that area. At the same time, I think it's good to have people who are there for some time. It takes time to see anything strategic through, right?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a combination of continuity and innovation, and finding the right balance of that. And that's why I think, former parents are important. Current parents are important because they are, they're the bill payer. And they're a joint customer with their children, right, of what we're doing. So, who better to give us feedback and inside perspective. But I think former athletes, one, I have no agenda, right? My agenda is the greater good of our student athletes. I hope every kid gets to have, and I'm not saying my experience was perfect at Wahoos,
no,
but I came up through the program, and I'm happy with, everything it gave me. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, and, it's so easy to talk about, what's wrong in the world.
Right.
Finding a piece of the world that you can give your time, talents, energy to, I think it's just an outlet to not get caught up in, like, when you own a leadership position in an organization, that certainly we have all types of things that we can be improving.
Right.
It's meaningful to give your time back, as opposed to sitting on social media or talking over coffee about, the world could be so much better. like get out there and make the world better.
Right.
So I certainly believe in volunteerism just in general.
Yep.
And I think the earlier we can get former student athletes and what I call student athlete leaders involved in our organization or other organizations, all the better. Look at, like, they get other perspectives by being involved in a board. So any athlete out there or former athlete, graduating senior, go back to your former club and find a way to give back to it.
Right. And I'll even put this plug in, because I'm somebody who, I don't feel good about my college swim team. Like, I don't have a good connection to my coach. We didn't get along. And for a while, like, I just felt angry about that, a little bit lost. Well, I grew up, I got around, I found some other college programs where I thought really positive stuff was going on. And then I just got involved. Like, so even if you don't feel positive about your particular place or your own experience, like there are people out there who are deserving of your energy and positivity. And it's way more productive than wallowing in what you don't like about one thing or another that happened in growing up. To just find something that you feel really positive about. These places need your help.
Amen.
They really, really do. All right. So another question I wanted to ask you. So we're not going to get so much into one half of the coaching transition here at Wahoos, but I wanted to ask you, like a lot of the Paul Donovan podcast was like, hey, how did he end up, full-time coaching here in the US? I wonder if you could give us a little bit of insight, because as we said, as a reference, like a lot of the audience for this is swim coaches. So I think there'd be a lot of value in them hearing from somebody who leads a board. Talk a little bit about that hiring process that brought Paul here.
So I think I was one of three. We were in a transition mode, and we needed a director of competitive swimming over a summer. From June to September, we wanted to have somebody to start the season. Luckily, at the time, the interim or the president between Bert German and myself was Brad Glenn. And Brad had a pretty, robust swimming network. He was in the swimming business in some form or another for a while, and was had a relatively deep network, and that was where a lot of our candidates came from. And we shortlisted. I can't remember if we got down to 3, 4, or 5, but we, obviously we were moving quickly. Zoom. I mean, this is 2 years before COVID. The first time I used Zoom was to interview Paul. Now I feel like I'm on it back to back to back.
Right. Right after this, you're on another Zoom call, right?
Yeah. Till 7 o'clock tonight, probably.
Right.
But Paul interviewed well. And I think he is the only person I've ever had in a professional experience that used the words or the phrase to become the best version of themselves in terms of our athletes. And I can't speak for Brad Glenn in what he heard, saw, but to me, that was the game changer. I knew that Paul knew swimming's important, right?
Sure.
We're a competitive swim program.
Sure.
We have to have a program that maximizes every kid's God-given swimming talent.
Yep.
Bottom to top. But more important than that, we owe it to our parents and our student athletes to make this an experience that is co-curricular to help them become the best version of themselves. And that's, I can summarize my decision. Now, I asked a ton of probing questions, and we can get back to, positivity and character and all that. But that to me was the decision. I love that he had taken his own time. He initiated his own, basically created a path for himself to come to America and get exposed to the college program. And Greg Troy, like it's kind of like the West Point leadership experience. Like the fact that he took the chance on himself to go expose himself to Greg Troy and to volunteer. You hear about famous NFL coaches that slept in their car for the first 2 years trying to get a shot on a team. Like, that proves grit and a desire to take ownership of your career and your learning and your education and earn your stripes. And I think all of that led to him being the right candidate for us.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo a few of those things. And, hopefully if Paul is listening to this, it makes him as uncomfortable as possible, because he's not a very self-promotional guy. So we've got to tell people a little bit who he is. I mean, again, people listening to this know, like I went to University of Pennsylvania. I got a master's in applied positive psychology. And I joke with people that, their branding is off because it wasn't really an applied program. There's a lot of theory. I was sort of sent off on my own to figure out the applied part of it. And that's why I spent a long time just coaching before I felt confident that, like, hey, I could teach somebody else some of the sort of how to apply some of this. But I run into a lot of people because positive psychology has gotten more popular, who express enthusiasm for positive psychology. But as with anything, there's a difference between people who talk the talk and people who walk the walk. And Paul was somebody that I met, and I was like, from the very get-go, I said, oh, this guy gets it. Like he already gets this stuff. He's already coaching this way.
Yeah.
Right? This is already integrated in the way he's coaching. He doesn't even have the education, but intrinsically, like, he has got this stuff implemented. And I think you reference, be the best version of yourself. One of the things we always talk about too is how can we make swimming at Wahoos one of the most positive experiences in a kid's life, and that's why it's important for people to hear the story of the fact that it was a positive experience in your life. As you said, not perfect. You weren't grinning ear to ear all the time when you were swimming. That's another sort of thing we're working on, is what this definition of a positive experience is. And part of that is, that ability to look back and go, gosh, it wasn't always easy, but I feel really good about that thing that I did. I get a good feeling inside when I think about that experience. That's what we're aiming for here. And I think what attracted me to working with Paul is that he's always had that at the core as sort of a core value of the way that he coaches. And that's, I mean, I couldn't ask for more in terms of an environment to coach in, because when you start with that, it's a really good base for doing some awesome things in coaching.
It brings meaning to it, right? I mean, and I believe in that. Like, there's nothing more fun than competitive sport and maximizing talent, whether that's breaking the magic minute at 11, 12, 13, 14, breaking 5 minutes in the 500 free, like personal accomplishments, and then, maximizing personal accomplishments. But, there's the NCAA commercial, and I don't know what the exact wording is, but it's something to the effect of there's 100,000 student athletes in the NCAA, and 99% of them are going pro in something other than their sport. Mm-hmm. So I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we are a program dedicated to the co-curricular development of these kids, and swimming happens to be the platform. But coaches have such a powerful platform to guide and impact lives. And I'll throw another quote that they use at West Point, which is, "Upon the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that upon other fields on other days will bear the fruits of victory." by Douglas MacArthur. So like all of the intangibles, every cadet and athlete is because all of the intangibles that come from, what happens in the pool or on the sports field, in practice or in competition, leadership, perseverance, teamwork. There's so much goodness. And if we can maximize that and create an environment where that is able to be maximized, we'll have something special. We're not perfect, but I think we have all the right intent.
All right. Well, we're rapidly moving towards the end here, and I don't want to hold you too long before your next Zoom call. I'd like to finish with a lightning round of questions. And as you said, I've caught you off guard with a few questions. Here's where I really like to catch people off. I'll take it easy on you. Don't worry. I won't ask you about, as I've made Paul read some Wikipedia quotes about top Irish and Danish soccer players. They happen to be maybe a little bit more favorable about the Danish player. That was a strategy. I'm not going to do like Army Navy, to do anything like that. You referenced Michael Johnson growing up.
Yep.
In the sport of swimming, who was your idol athlete growing up?
Oh. So it's funny because this name just popped up the other day.
Yep.
But Tom Dolan was a stud when, 400 IMer and had all kinds of asthma issues.
Yeah.
So that's one that pops out, but Eric Vent is the name that stands out to me. And I remember, I don't remember the exact workout he did, but it was something like 10, 1650s or something. And we kept saying, we've got to do this workout. So that was my senior year. Eric Vent, he was just a phenomenal machine for workouts.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I grew up swimming again. I grew up in Massachusetts. And,
right.
He was a senior in high school when I was a freshman in high school. I think I swam against him on a 200 medley relay. And I say against him, I was in the lane next to him when he was swimming.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So,
I don't want anybody to.
that name is probably not meaningful to a lot of the younger generation, but that's I have no idea why that name popped up.
Yeah.
Recently, but Eric Vent is definitely,
anybody
with work ethic.
Yeah.
I love that.
I also completely freaked him out because I think I saw him at a meet and we were in the swim down pool together and I just was staring at him and he was like, "What?" And I went, "You're my hero." So I totally relate to that. My favorite guy growing up, and I never even saw him swim, was Mike Barrowman. He was the world record holder in the 200 breast at that time. And people just talked about, he had a great work ethic and had this amazing swim. And I just thought like, oh God, the guy's like the coolest.
I think work ethic is just like, it's what gives you hope, right? If you know that there's people that are working hard, and Eric Vent and, everybody else that makes the Olympics, like when we talk about maximizing God-given talent, my God-given talent was probably not to compete in the Olympics, but the work ethic is that thing that you can believe in and get as far as you can. What else we got? I'm trying to delay the rapid questions.
I call this the lightning round, but it's really the BS about a bunch of topics at the end of the podcast round. You referenced some coaches like Bob Christella is probably a name that a lot of people listening haven't heard of. What are some other some coaching influences that maybe are not a familiar name to people that you really drew on growing up?
So Bob Christella is unknown, right? Yeah. But I'll tell you, as a 6-year-old in Cinnaminson, New Jersey, at Pomona Swim Club, it was my first taste of perseverance. He wouldn't let me leave, and this might be unheard of now, but he wouldn't let me.
You can't do this now, yeah.
He wouldn't let me leave practice without doing 4 no-breathers every day. Because 6 years old, that breath takes you forever.
Right.
It changed, who you are at 6 years old. Talk about overcoming something. So Bob Christella, inside of Jersey Wahoos, certainly Karen Clemens and John Carroll. I swam for both of them. And then outside, my college coaches, I got something from all of them. Scott Felix was who really recruited me at West Point, and enthusiastic guy. He's at Union College now. We got to connect probably 2 years ago.
He recruited me in high school, Scott Felix. Yeah, I remember.
So
he was a former. Yeah, go ahead.
When I got into West Point, Scott was like, "You did?" Like, it caught him off guard. So that's a great memory. Ray Bossy was there. John O'Neill. I think it may have been John O'Neill that encouraged us to give back to the sport. And then Matt Crispino,
who's the head men's coach at Princeton now.
Yeah, head men's coach at Princeton. He was our assistant coach when I was a senior. When I was grad assistant, he continued to be an assistant. And we were roommates. So he became a good friend, and he's my connectivity to the coaching world. If I ever decide to hang up the corporate or entrepreneurial jacket and put a swim jersey back on, he's probably my first call. I'll be a volunteer assistant coach for him somewhere.
Put on a synthetic polo shirt and sweat on the pool deck. And
that's right.
Really. So final question. This is a completely off swimming topic, and this is important to me. As somebody who lives right next to New York City, New York City's got the bagel, it's got pizza. Philly has a cheesesteak. What's an underrated Jersey food staple? Like that because I haven't really found that thing that's like, you can only get this in Jersey and it's so good.
So everything is defined. New Jersey is defined either as New York or Philadelphia, right? I mean, like, right. I don't know that there is anything. So you've got me.
Well, I've got my search.
Sorry to disappoint.
And my search will continue.
White House hoagies down in Atlantic City are probably a worthy trip at some point in time.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you before we go. I'm
gonna turning the lightning round around. Oh my gosh.
I think it's the most important thing anybody can get is book recommendations. So what was the most impactful book you've read on positive psychology for coaching?
Oh, I would say the first book, like my entree into positive psychology was, and I still kind of think it's the best book. It's probably 20 years old now, maybe even a little bit older than that. It's Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. And, he's got some books down the line that actually, show how things have advanced and probably summarize some of the stuff that from Learned Optimism. So you don't necessarily need to read Learn Optimism. There's I forget actually now the name of the second one, but there's Thriving as a book. Oh, sorry. Authentic Happiness is the second one. And I think the most recent one is called The Hope Circuit. I've not read that yet, but really to me, that one teaches you everything you need to know about positive psychology. It takes you on the whole journey from him being a researcher at Princeton and basically torturing dogs. And I won't get into this because I've talked about it on other podcasts, but people can look up, like Google Martin Seligman, dogs, learned helplessness, and you can sort of find out. He developed this theory of, you can learn to be pessimistic, basically. And it took him 30 years to get from you can learn to be pessimistic to, oh, the opposite is true. You can learn to be optimistic. It's not just like who you are naturally, that there's a skill you can practice here. And for me, that was the light bulb where I went, this stuff is a skill that you can practice. And I guess a lot of people probably learn that just naturally. You just sort of figure that out, but to have some structure behind it and to be able to sort of put some of that infrastructure behind it, it's been really helpful. And I recommend Learned Optimism to everybody. I'm staring, actually, my computer is on a stack of positive psychology books, so
There
I
you
can
go.
get this perfect downward angle. So I'm, Character Strengths and Virtues by Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman is a great book. Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz, who's a professor at Swarthmore.
Chris Peterson is actually a mentor of a West Point classmate of mine. I think he passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 2015. He was an incredible person. Like Martin Seligman, who's still at the University of Pennsylvania, is known as like the most famous name in positive psychology.
Right.
But the heart of the foundation of positive psychology was 100% Chris Peterson. He was a guy who, Martin Seligman would come in and he would give these amazing lectures, and he would bring in amazing experts, and he would be sharing with you sort of like the latest thing he's working on. Chris Peterson was a guy who would come up to the front of the classroom, cross his arms like this, and he'd stare out and he'd be quiet and go, "How's everybody doing?" And he really meant it. You got the sense he really, really cared about you as a person. And I think probably your friends encountered him at University of Michigan.
That's right.
The guy taught a course at Michigan that was so popular, they filled the biggest lecture hall they had at University of Michigan. And then eventually they started showing his lectures on closed circuit TV across the campus because they had so many people that wanted to do it. It's just incredible.
Since we're on that topic, I'm going to make a shout out to Mike Irwin and Jeff Bryan at the Positivity Project. I think that's, I think coaches, they're focused on elementary and high school education and positive psychology, but I think coaches can take a lot from their platform.
Yeah, I would echo that. I've gotten a free preview of their materials, and I can tell you they've done incredible work in terms of taking positive psychology curriculum and packaging it in a way that you can really use in a
and the entire I guess inspiration for starting that for Mike Irwin was Chris Peterson's death and what he calls the hashtag Other People Matter movement. I think
that was his famous saying, "Other people matter."
So I don't know what your typical closing is, but I know that there's a multitude.
You want a closing monologue, BJ?
I will give it my close, which is other people do matter. So to our athletes, keep working hard. To our coaches, creating an environment, what you do matters. Find other ways to maximize your platform. To our parents, trust your coaches. Advocate for your athlete, but trust your coaches. And to any volunteer board member out there, keep doing what you're doing, because there's a lot of organizations that, there's a lot of behind the scenes work, but it's important that we find ways to give back. All right, back to you, Chris.
Thank you, BJ. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for being willing to tell all those stories, even the questions that I didn't too much for. And thanks for everybody for listening.
Thanks, buddy. See ya.